Okay. Let's get rolling. Good afternoon and welcome back. I hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving break. If you have been traveling, I know it's been really dicey and pretty treacherous out there, so I encourage you to continue to stay safe. If you're at any point not able to come to class because of the weather and conditions, let me know. Again, send me an email and I'm happy to give you the link to attend remotely. We have a couple people doing that for today. I hope you had a great time. Also, if you at any point are feeling sick or under the weather, help us all out. And rather than coming to class, let me know, send a Zoom link, and you're able to attend remotely for that too. There are some nasty bugs going around, so I encourage you to do what you can to take care of yourself as we get into the final 2 weeks of the term. I was out in Salt Lake City over the holiday break. Spent some time with my partner's extended family, had a bunch of food, we played a bunch of Smash Bros. It was great. Hope you had some good time traveling, or if you were just in town, taking some time to catch up. So as we head into the final 2 weeks of the term, I have a few updates for you, and we'll be getting into some of the new material that starts to look at relationships with friends and then with family and marriage relationships. So to get us started, I know it's going way, way, way back, but let's get some of the dust off and think back. So before the break, we had that Friday meeting where we did some time to review. But before that, we did take some time to discuss the ways that relationships develop. And one of the ideas was a concept that refers to the idea that our relationships are defined in terms of contradiction. That we feel pulled in different directions as our relationships develop. And this is either A, family systems theory, B, exchange theory, C, co-cultural theory, or D, relational dialectics theory. I'll give you a minute or two on that, and then we'll have the chance to talk about that together. Okay, anybody who'd like some more time on this one? How many people think the best answer here is family systems theory? If not, we'll be talking more about that later. How about exchange theory? Co-cultural or relational dialectics? Yes, so relational dialectics is the best answer. We can think back to this idea about how relationships navigate these tensions. One way of thinking about this is the prefix dia, right, for dialogue. Dialectic is looking at two different things that are in opposition or conversation with each other. For example, we like the feeling of autonomy, we like to be our own people and independent, but we also like the feeling of being connected and feeling interdependent with other people too. So navigating those tensions in our relationships is a really big way that we communicate with each other and help to develop our relationships over time. So that's the best answer here for this question. And again, helps in dusting off and preparing and thinking about the final exam in the course. So we did have a workshop for the reporting and reflection essay. Previously, we talked about strategies of managing relationships. And today, I'm going to be spending some time going through the essay, some of the things that I noticed, and giving you a glance at our remaining class meetings, examining friendships in communication and some of the challenges facing friendships in communication. I have looked through all of the essays. I currently have the grades muted on those just because I've been waiting on a couple extensions from students. But once I get those in, which should be later today or Wednesday at the latest, I'm muting and you should be able to see your grades and comments on those. So I do want to give some general observations, things that I noticed related to this assignment, and some tips as you're thinking ahead to future essays in your courses and things to expect. So in these final 2 weeks, we have in our remaining class meetings a few things to do here. So we'll be looking at friendships for today, and we'll be looking at family and marriage communication on Wednesday and Sunday. Also, we have our final 2 Canvas prompts of the term. Number 7 is due by this Sunday, and number 8 is due by Sunday, December 11th. Remember that you only need to complete 6 out of the 8. So if you've already done 6, you're golden. But if you choose to do more than 6, then I will only grade your highest 6 and I'll drop any lower scores. So note that those are coming up. And then next week, we'll be looking at interpersonal communication in the workplace and negative communication, also called the dark side of interpersonal communication, and the ways that we develop strategies to deal with those things. We'll be using December 9th as a final class meeting to wrap up, to help you to prepare for and study for the final exam in the course, to go over any remaining questions. Remember that the final exam is just like the midterm in that it's a 3-day window that you can take it on Canvas. You'll have 2 hours once you choose to open it, 25 multiple choice, it's 4 choose 3 short essay questions. So that'll be opening up between December 12th and December 14th. So that is going to primarily cover the contents that we've discussed since the midterm exam. It is cumulative in the sense that everything we've been talking about in the course is built off of itself, right? So we can't look at communication in the workplace without understanding a model of communication or what verbal and nonverbal communication are. But I do recommend spending most of your time on the new content to help you prepare. Just like last time, for Wednesday's class, to give you a 2-week window, I will be sharing a study guide and practice questions that you can use to help with preparing for that final exam. And then the last thing to know is the extra credit and all of the remaining assignments of the course. The hard deadline for getting those in is December 14th. That's the date that I have to submit grades to the registrar's office for the term. So just know if you're working through any remaining assignments, get everything locked in by that date so that you can receive the grade that you'd like to receive for the course. So I'll be talking about the extra credit here in just a minute too. So the extra credit, so I'm teaching a course called COM 310, Communication and Social Change, that meets right after this one. So if you see people that are looming in the hallway, that's for this next course. We're really lucky in this course to have Oregon Rural Action, which is an Eastern Oregon-based nonprofit. They do a lot of really cool work related to reaching farm worker communities and using social media about issues surrounding access to clean drinking water and equities in health. So they have graciously agreed to present in my COM 310 class on Wednesday, December 7th from 1 to 2:50, so right after this class. So what I'm giving you the opportunity to do, if you'd like, is to attend this presentation, right after class, we are going to be reserving a larger room for it. So the actual room location is forthcoming. So that'll be an opportunity for you to attend and then complete a brief write-up. In the write-up, I'll be just asking you to reflect on what you're noticing and how this might tie to interpersonal communication. I recognize that for some of you, you might have work, practice, other courses meet right after this one, and that time might not work for you. And that's okay. There's either an option for you to attend synchronously through Zoom, or ORA has agreed to have their presentation recorded, in which case I will post the link and give you the opportunity to watch that asynchronously as well. So you'll have the chance to see that in some capacity following the meeting on the 7th. You'll be completing that write-up. You don't have to do the extra credit, but if you do, you'll add 20 points or 2% onto your final grade. So I just wanted to let you know what that opportunity looks like. So again, I do want to let you know some general comments and feedback that I have regarding the recording and reflection essay that can hopefully help as you're preparing for other final essays and looking forward in this and other classes. The big thing is that there are several folks who have not had the chance to turn in the essay. If you are one of those people, I really encourage and beg you to do so because the recording reflection essay is 20% of your grade. So if that's not in, you have a very difficult path in order to pass. So remember that late assignments can still be turned in for -5% for each day something is late. So that is minus about 10 points. So it can still be turned in for partial credit. But I do recommend that you contact me or get that turned in as soon as possible if you haven't already done so, so that you have a better window in order to receive a passing grade. I did want to highlight that there were a lot of essays that did a great job of engaging with the material, but there were some that were missing some of the parts of the assignment. So remember, for this assignment, I was asking that you included 3 things: the essay itself, the transcription, which was the written version of your exchange with that other person, and then the inclusion of in-text and works cited. There were some submissions that did not include a transcription, also some submissions that didn't include an in-text citation. Thankfully, inclusion of the works cited was really good. People got that down pretty well. But I do encourage you to continue to use in-text citations when needed, since those lack of inclusion of some of those things dinged a few people. I really liked the ideas that people were bringing in. A lot of people were talking about different listening styles. A lot of people were talking about the different stages of the listening process. Some people were talking about the use of verbal communication. So I think people did a good job of thinking about ideas and concepts from the course that they could bring in to make sense of the conversation, and that's great, right? That's what we do. And I also felt like folks did a great job of identifying and explaining what the situation was. I had people who were in a long distance relationship and talking about, how they were catching up by talking about How I Met Your Mother. Or I had another conversation that was 2 people in a car who were driving somewhere and just kind of having a very free-flowing conversation. So I really enjoyed hearing about the conversations that you had, hearing about some of the things that you learned from that process, and having the chance to share. So I really appreciated that. I do encourage you to continue to work on for essays to define and apply some concepts, right? So for some of the submissions that we're really including the in-text citations or references, there were times when an idea was not fully explained when it was brought in. For instance, complementing as a nonverbal function may have been mentioned, but it wasn't really explained or fully developed. So I encourage you to really clearly explain and build on the ideas that you're bringing in. So there were some situations in which the course concepts were not being fully explained or integrated. And I encourage continuing to use rich examples, right? I think some of the best essays were ones that use perhaps snippets of the conversation, really clear examples to show what was happening and what was playing out. There were some that said things like, well, the understanding process was happening because I understood the conversation, right? Which I encourage you to continue to dig in to some of the details in order to substantiate your main points. So I'll be having more specific individualized feedback for you, but I did want to have the chance to share some of the general things that I noticed about this essay, and appreciate your patience as I'm waiting on the last couple submissions. Any questions about anything we talked about last class, anything related to the essays or remaining assignments before we get started? Yeah.
So are the campus prompts going to be graded? Like,
Yes.
are the grades going to be posted soon?
So yeah, so I was prioritizing working through the essays. The remaining Canvas prompts, the grades for those should be up by Wednesday. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I apologize. There's been a backlog of submissions that have been a bit late or had an extension that has made things a little bit messy, but I'm doing my best to continue to work through that and should have everything fully updated for you very soon. All right, so let's start to get into some of the new stuff for today. And in particular, thinking about friendship, communication, and the ways in which friendships develop over time, right? Oftentimes, we don't really think about the friends that we have in our lives. They're just there, right? Or we know a friend when they are one. Oftentimes for us, we have friends that we've had for a very long time, people we've known since childhood, and perhaps we're developing newer friends through clubs, activities, through coming to campus and getting to know new people, right? Oftentimes, we don't really take stock and ask ourselves who's a friend and who's not. Generally, there are some unwritten rules and expectations about what makes somebody a friend. But if we think about this in the context of communication, there are 5 major ways in which we can define a friendship and use communication as part of that process of developing a friendship. So generally speaking, scholars have found 5 principles. One of them is the idea that a friendship is voluntary. Yes, you might be in the same class with somebody else. Yes, you might be on a club or a team with somebody else, and you have to engage with them on that basis. But what makes a friendship unique is that you're choosing to spend time with that person outside of the regular roles and structure that you're forced to engage with that person. For example, maybe at your job, you have a regular coworker and you and that person work at the same shift, right? So of course, by happenstance, you're going to communicate with that person. But you choosing to spend time with them over the weekend when neither of you are working shows this idea of voluntary friendships planning. Another idea here is that a friendship is personal, right? It's negotiated between 2 different people. In other words, a friendship is different than a parasocial relationship. Oftentimes, people who use social media, such as celebrities and famous figures, right, will create content that is designed for their fans, like they might create a post or appreciate their fans. That's not the same, right? It's not a friendship because it's not directed towards you specifically, and they don't really know who you are. So, you know, unless somebody had the chance to reply to you on Twitter and you have a conversation with a celebrity in that capacity, it's generally not personal. Another idea here is the spirit of equality. If we think back to uncertainty reduction theory, right? We know that our relationships are not always equal one-to-one in every conversation that we have, right? We're not monitoring and saying, how many words did this person say? How many words did this person say? Is it 50% between the 2? That'd be silly. But it's the idea that even though one person might talk more than the other, one person's needs might be met more than the other at certain points in times, that both people are gaining something from that relationship. You can think back to social exchange theory as part of this idea, that if you're talking to a friend, there's an expectation that you can share some of the things going on in your life in the same way that they can. So the spirit of equality is nurtured through developing good friendship. There's also this idea of a friendship being mutual, right? Both parties have to be involved. There are some cases in which maybe there's somebody that you're talking to and you don't think a whole lot of them. They seem really excited and really ask you a lot of questions. That's not necessarily a friendship because both people have to think about that person as a friend. So that's an important element. There's also the idea that a friendship is affective, right? So if you were traveling for the holidays and maybe you saw a cousin and you were shocked at how large they had become from the last time that you saw them, right? Maybe they were in grade school and now they're graduating high school, right? And you have shock expression on your face. That's affect. Our emotional immediate reaction to something, how we choose to respond to something in the moment, that's affect. So our friendships are affective in that we feel and experience emotions. They play out in our conversations and engagement with other people in a way that feels immediate and instantaneous. If you're catching up with people over the holiday break and you're excited to see them and you're smiling and you're happy, that immediate reaction and experiencing emotion is affect. We feel something from our friendships. So these elements help us to kind of define and delineate what makes friendships unique and some of the ways that friendships communicate. And this also connects back to an earlier idea that we've been talking about of communication competence, right? To be a competent or effective communicator, we've got to think about what our goals are that we choose when we communicate with other people, and we use interaction as a way of meeting those goals. So for instance, we choose to communicate with people because we're interested in catching up with them. We care about them. We want to show our interest in them and their well-being, right? So we use communication competence in a friendship context in order to explain and disclose to them degree to which we care and want to facilitate that friendship. We also have this idea of friendship dialectics. As I mentioned a little earlier, we see dialectics play out in a variety of different relationships. And in friendships in particular, there's a few different dialectics that especially stand out. And these dialectics are generally divided into two different categories. We can think about contextual dialectics. This is based more out of culture and situation, right? So these dialectics are more due to the environment and location that you're in. Perhaps you're communicating with somebody who comes from a very different culture or landscape. Perhaps you're both here in Eastern Oregon. You're talking about the snow and hazardous conditions, right? That would be a contextual element versus an interactional element. Is more about the behavior that you and the other person bring into the friendship, right? So think about contextual as factors outside of the friendship. Think about behavioral as choices that are being made within the friendship itself. One contextual factor to consider is private versus public, right? For instance, to what degree do you make information about yourself and your life publicly available to other people, such as the use of social media? How much do you post or share on social media? There's oftentimes a lot of cultural differences where some people might choose to be very professional and not really engage in social media much, or people who share and express a lot of personal details, things related to mental health and well-being in a way that might not be present in other cultures in that same way. So the degree of disclosure and sharing private material is one thing that we see contextually. And also this idea of ideal versus real. Again, ideal referring to how you want things to be. Maybe you wish it was really nice and sunny outside versus it not being very great weather. And how do you choose to engage with those things in your relationships? Are you really thinking about what you would like and talking very aspirationally, or are you taking a more grounded, realistic approach to your communication? We also have the chance to think about interactional within friendships. One of them being this idea of independence and dependence. Again, we feel a drive and we feel a desire to be ourselves. We don't want to lose ourselves in our friendships, but at the same time, we want to connect with and understand and feel support from other people. So this desire to be our own people, but also to feel connected with our friends is one challenge. Affection versus instrumentality, right? So on the one end, we might have friendships that, don't actually do anything for us, right? Aren't really achieving something in our lives, but we love and we care about people and we enjoy having them around, and our feelings of affection in many ways drive our friendships. On the other end, we have instrumentality, which is a much more Machiavellian approach. Maybe you chose to make a friend in one of your classes who was sitting near you because you needed a study buddy, or you needed somebody who would help to take notes for you when you were gone, right? That would be a much more instrumental view of friendships, of achieving a particular end that you had in mind. We also struggle between judgment and acceptance. Sometimes we're making judgments and evaluation of other people. For instance, maybe we're judging somebody for their clothes or for their friends or their relationships in their lives, right? And sometimes we can become too judgmental and critical of other people that are outside of our own framework. But we also have to reconcile that with our acceptance. Maybe we don't like our friend's new partner, but we recognize that they're happy and we want them to be happy and we want to support them. So we juggle that too. And then again, this idea of expressiveness versus protectiveness. How much of ourselves do we choose to share? How open are we about who we are versus how much do we keep close to our chest? Again, many of you probably went through some challenges in middle school and junior high, people sharing and telling a lot of secrets and disclosing personal details to friends that might get out and be shared through gossip and rumors, right? That's a challenge that we experience in the fear of confiding in other people and being expressive based on that information being circulated to other people. So we also have stages of friendship. If we think back to the 10 stages of development of relationships, this is somewhat similar in that it's not a fully linear structure, right? In fact, we can move back and forth in the ways that our friendships develop. And sometimes not all friendships can make it through all of these 7 stages. But I think it's a good general framework to understand the ways that friendships develop. I'll give you an example of a good friend of mine that I had in kindergarten through 3rd grade named Max. We went to school together growing up. And then in 3rd grade, we transferred into public high schools together. And at that point, we were not in the same classes, and then he moved to Eugene, and we didn't really have the chance to connect as much, right? So we went through these different stages. In the first stage, role delimited interaction. That's the idea that the only context in which you're talking to that person is within the roles and norms that you have with anybody else in that situation, right? So you're in a classroom with other students, and you are interacting with them in a very basic way, right? Or, you are in a dorm room with somebody else who's in the hall, and you maybe wave at them. The only context in which you're talking to that person is in the very basic ways that you see and interact with them. Nothing past that. Over time, you might start to develop a friendly relation with that person. You are making choices to spend time with that person, to ask questions about that person, and to get to know them in a way that goes beyond the very basic rudimentary things that you have to do. For instance, you might choose to start to casually chat with somebody that's sitting near you, talk about some of the things that you're interested in, find a few things that you share in common, or start to learn where your roommate's from and what they're doing here. You start to move toward friendship. Maybe that means something basic like an invitation, asking somebody if they want to go watch a movie with you, or spend some time getting to know you in a context outside of the regular day-to-day interaction that you have with them, right? So that's generally that type of move. It's interesting because I think we don't always have the same social scripts for developing friendships in that way, right? Sometimes we worry that asking to spend time with somebody as a friend might be something that is interpreted as a date, right? When we don't mean for it to be. So that can be a challenging thing to explain clearly. We have a nascent friendship. That's an early developing friendship. We can think about the stages of uncertainty reduction and social penetration as examples of this. You start to share, disclose more about each other. You're starting to spend time with that person, and they're starting to be integrated in your life. That might be the stage where you're sharing information on social media, exchanging things, right? One kind of trend that's common in these early relationship stages is people who just share and pass along content with each other. A good friend and I, one of the things we did when we first started becoming friends was that we made Spotify playlists for each other of some of our favorite music to introduce ourselves to music that we like and find points of overlap. Then we moved to a stabilized friendship. That's a friend that we generally consider somebody that we can rely on and somebody that we know feels strongly that they're a friend too. One way of thinking about if you're in a stabilized friendship is to think, even if I don't regularly message this person, they're still a big part of my life, right? Oftentimes, if we're away for school, we've got other things going on, we're not necessarily messaging them all the time, but we have an expectation that they are going to be around and a part of our lives no matter what. There's a level of trust and safeguards built there that we didn't have before. Some friendships wane, right? In a waning friendship, you're still friends, but maybe it's an old friend, somebody maybe from high school or middle school, and you're starting to drift apart with that person. So maybe you don't talk as much, you don't have quite as much in common. Maybe you sit down and get coffee with somebody and you realize that you don't have a whole lot to talk about anymore, or you don't have that same degree of connection. That would be that waning friendship category. And then post-friendship would refer to you and that person no longer being friends, but you still have memories and experiences from when you were friends, and you still might think fondly about that experience. For example, my friend Max and I kind of drifted apart, and we no longer were really friends. But one thing I always love to remember is that when we were friends, we really liked making those beaded geckos and lizards, with the little plastic beads. And so every time I see one of those, or my mom puts one of them on the Christmas tree, I think back to that friendship and I remember that fondly, right? So we oftentimes have those sensory experiences that help us bring back those memories from the post-friendship stage. We also have what are known as friendship styles. And I'm going to be asking you in your Canvas prompt for this week to be thinking about which of these three styles best describes the friendships that you're in. In an independent friendship style, it's generally a situation in which you're choosing friendships based on circumstances and situations in your life. For instance, maybe your primary circle of friends are people that are on the same team as you, or people that are in your dorm, right? Generally speaking, they're people that make sense based on the situation and context. Maybe you and a friend developed a relationship because you commiserated through a really difficult physics course. And through that, you developed a connection. Oftentimes, people don't really remember the names of their previous friends as well under this style. And generally, it's more based on the circumstance and moment, that these kinds of friendships are more likely to drift apart if life events change. Acquisitive is this idea that people are looking for and trying to acquire or build new friends, right? So if you're playing Scarlet and Violet, it's like you're catching a new Pokemon, right? You're making a new friend, you're finding them out there in the world. So it's this idea that people are seeking those friendships and seeing them as positive and able to help them in developing their sense of self. So one good example of this is that a lot of dating apps now offer a service in which people can search for friends in a platonic context. A lot of apps such as OkCupid or Bumble, which has the Bumble BFF feature, right, are designed to create opportunities for platonic friendships and allow people to agentically seek those out, right, to message people, to swipe people, and start to get to know and make those new relationships. And then lastly, there's the idea of discerning friendships. That is really looking for perhaps a smaller set of people with whom you really want to make a deep, long-term commitment, right? So maybe you're setting your roots down, you're moving to a new location, and you're really trying to build a sense of community and camaraderie with other people. That would be an example of using a more discerning friendship style to really try to make a longer lasting relationship. I swear every time there's one of these 2x2 maps, I feel like the book does like an entirely different visual. We've got rectangles, we had ovals last time, but I think it's also useful for us to understand some of the different types of friendships that develop, right? And these can be measured in terms of whether the friendship is healthy or unhealthy. A healthy friendship is one in which people feel emotionally secured and supported. Unhealthy is oftentimes a destructive and messy relationship, and whether somebody is enjoying or not enjoying, right? We can enjoy something that's unhealthy. For instance, if you enjoy Cheetos, right, that is an enjoyable, unhealthy thing. So sometimes we have the Cheeto equivalent of our relationships. In an ideal friendship, we find that we're able to connect to somebody in a way that's both healthy and enjoyable. You enjoy spending time with that person, they enjoy spending time with you, you feel connected to them. And overall, things feel really good. Right? We also have, as we've talked about, a waning friendship. It's not that the relationship is unhealthy, there's nothing wrong there, but you're not really enjoying it in the same way. You're struggling to find things to talk about and connect over. You're just having a difficult time really getting to know and relating to that person. A problematic friendship, right, is a friendship that is enjoyable but unhealthy, right? So this is oftentimes a high drama friendship. Again, I grew up with therapist parents who always like to tell me that in a lot of situations, people become addicted to drama, right? That it's not necessarily that people will say, oh, I really like this fight, but there is a sense of adrenaline, excitement, making things more interesting that conflict and drama might bring to the table that makes something more enjoyable, even if it's not necessarily healthy, right? I watch trash reality TV. I just finished the recent season of Bachelor in Paradise, and there's a whole bunch on these types of shows of like really toxic, destructive, yelling relationships. There's this couple who gets into a fight over whether or not itching and pain are the same thing, and it's ridiculous. But it's an example of the ways that people might choose to get into fights and arguments, but still enjoy being in a relationship, right? They're destructive and hurtful to each other, and the problem is me. That's problematic friendship. And then a deviant friendship, right, is friendship that is neither enjoyable nor healthy. Seems a little bit weird, but there's a variety of reasons that this might happen. First of all, a relationship might not start out that way, right? Somebody could become manipulative or hurtful over time, and it could lose what it initially had. Or unfortunately, there are contexts where people perhaps due to mental health, low self-esteem, or material-related issues might find themselves unworthy or unable to form other connections, or are choosing to remain in a relationship that might be seen as negative. Right? So there are challenges here in this form, but that is one of the ways that friendships can happen, is oftentimes in a very one-sided or destructive way. So communication studies has generally found that when we think about differences as it relates to gender, right, the differences in communication are not necessarily biological. In fact, most of the difference is cultural. It's the society, the culture we grew up in, the norms, the roles, the degree to which certain opportunities to interact and get to know people might be separated or segregated by gender, right? That's this idea of how relationships might develop and change on this basis. And we can see this in terms of both communal and agentic friendships. In this way, a communal friendship is a friendship that tends to be based more on self-disclosure, communication, intimacy, and emotional support, right? The stereotype is that women tend to be more likely to pursue communal friendships, whereas the stereotype is that men tend to be more pursuing of agentic friendships that involves completing activities and doing things, right? The reality is that across genders and experiences, people fit into these different types of friendships on a more individual basis. And that oftentimes culture might be the factor that's guiding us toward one type of friendship over another, right? What this means, though, is that oftentimes when there is overlap in the different styles of friendships, that they're better able to, right? If you're somebody who really likes to form connections by doing things, you're more likely to make friends in that way. And you're more likely to find like-minded people if you're more into a communal or conversational friendship style. Again, to give you an example, I saw my partner's family over the Thanksgiving break out near Salt Lake City. And my partner's dad is a physics professor and is a very communal type of friendship. He likes to probe and ask questions and like acquire knowledge and learn about things. Uses that to connect, but my partner's brothers, I played with a bunch of Smash Bros with them, and that was the way we connected, right? It was a much more agentic friendship. So we oftentimes find differences in that style as it plays out in our relationships. The last thing I want to hit on before an activity for today are just some of the challenges and things that we find that can be difficult in how we use communication for our friends. Mentioned a few weeks ago that there was that film that came out, Justin Timberlake and Mila Kunis, friends with benefits, right? It's a term that has emerged in the last decade or two to describe people who are friends or sexually involved with each other, right? This norm and this practice is something that is in many ways changing and complicating what we define as friends, right? There's a lot of new terms and ideas and concepts that are developing, can change and rethink friendships and the ways that friendships play out, right? And this points to the ways that communication is ever changing in relationship to technology, friendships, and so on. So one challenge that we might find is how friendships are coded to other people. For instance, people who might only be friends being read as romantically or sexually involved with each other, right? Particularly if there's an assumption that both people in that couple are sexually attracted or have a sexual orientation that would relate to them being attracted to each other. That's not always the case. Right? In fact, we see a lot of examples in media of that not being the case. You might, if you ever watched the old classic film When Harry Met Sally, right? There's the famous line in that film where one of the characters asserts that he doesn't think that men and women can be friends. Obviously, that has been pretty thoroughly debunked and critiqued, right? That oftentimes individuals, men and women, might not have sexual attraction to each other based on sexual orientation or just not interested. But even if they do, right, that's not always acted upon and that people can remain platonic friends. We can also think about aspects like technology, right? The usage of exchanging messages online, engaging online, and some of the limits of that we've experienced over the past years, and factors of culture and gender too. The ways in which we bridge connections and make friends who might come from really different backgrounds than we do and create a sort of third sense of meaning based on that relationship. So what I'd like you to do is to take some time to chat with a group of people. I think we've got about 4 folks on this side and maybe a larger group of 5 over here for you all to talk a little bit with each other. I'd like one person to maybe take some notes for the group. First of all, on how you use technology to create and maintain your friendships. Take some time to share and have one person who's noting some of the common themes and observations that come up there. Next, I want you to think about how you know when somebody has become your friend, right? What is it that signals that to you and kind of crosses over into being a friend? And then lastly, I want you to think a little bit about how friendships might be impacted by change. For instance, moving to college or COVID-19 or some of the other challenges that have come up. And again, noting some of the similarities that come up. If you're on Zoom, I'll ask that you just take some time to share and email that to me. Otherwise, take some time to chat with members of your group, and I'll ask the groups to share some of the things that came out from that conversation.
Oh, good guy.
Yeah, so even if you're nearby, right, there's ways that you might find that you and your friends are on different tracks or doing different things.
Yeah.
With so much different ways of making it online, having, giving somebody the phone number, kind of more personal.
What about you, Dave? We'll go around the room.
I know this is the first but my friends and I that went to school, even if they were separate, we come back. Yeah, it's just very
Feeling pattern would just be this by or person.
So take another minute to wrap up here.
Some home state.
Location or like this. How much of it? How much effort you have to put in order to maintain a relationship.
That was very nice.
I don't know.
All right, so let's go ahead and come back here. So I noticed a few things that came up from your conversations here, right? In terms of technology, people might vary in their use of social media. Some people might not use it at all. Some people might only use text. I know it's been popular for a lot of people to only use Messenger and like to delete something like the Facebook app for various reasons. So that can be a trend. I also had in the morning class, some people mentioned that they have a lot of situations in which they'll post something on social media and they'll have friends who react and engage or like comment on it, right? And that's a way of maintaining a relationship without direct communication. Some people noted that becoming a friend is kind of when you're starting to exchange those personal details, or you might kind of verbally confirm that with somebody else, right? That can be a challenge. We don't all sometimes have the script or code for that. It's interesting to be following more recent language of being like bros or developing bromance because it provides a kind of vocabulary to understand platonic relationships among men in ways that oftentimes has not had that vocabulary. A lot of people were mentioning some of the challenges of coming back to relationships. For example, like, the challenges with facial expressions and understanding one another with a mask, the challenges of engaging after being away, and the ways that friendships can be impacted by those shifts as well. So to wrap up, I mentioned some of the things to prepare for some of the major final assignments in the course, as well as the role of friendships and communication. Next class, we'll be looking at family communication. So please pass forward or email me the work that you did with your group members' names on it. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Enjoy whatever the heck is going on out there. Stay safe, and I'll see you again on Wednesday.
The fact that the field is green now again is kind of funny.
I don't know about Oregon. Every